Hi there! Today we're talking about topic 5.2, voter turnout. In this lesson, you should learn about factors that impact voter turnout. Let's first talk about voter turnout terms. The first being voting age population. This is the number of people who are over the age of 18. Whether they vote or not, whether they are allowed to vote or not, this is all people in an area who are over the age of 18. That is different, however, from the voting eligible population. This is the number of people who are actually eligible to vote. Even though you're 18, you may not be eligible to vote. If you are not a citizen of the United States, or if you are convicted of a felony in some states, or in some states even a misdemeanor, if you are then currently in jail during an election, you are not able to vote. Voter registration is a requirement that eligible voters will enroll on an electoral roll before they can vote. Most states, if not all states, have voter registration requirements. Some require that you register to vote beforehand. In fact, in the state of Georgia, it's at least 30 days prior to an election. You have to be registered to vote. Though some states actually allow for same-day voter registration, meaning that you could walk up on election day and register to vote right there. Finally, we'll talk about voter turnout, and this is the number of voters who actually cast votes as a percentage of the voting age population. Notice, it's a percentage, and it's the number of people who actually vote versus the voting age population, not the voting eligible population. There are a lot of different things that can be used to determine voter turnout. And so let's look at each of these. The first is political efficacy. And political efficacy is a citizen's belief. It's your belief that your vote can actually make a difference, that your one vote can actually make a difference. As elections become more contentious and they are closer and closer, each vote actually counts more, in a sense, because every vote really is possible of turning the election one way or the other. Voter apathy, on the other hand, is the opposite of voter efficacy. And it can come about because of lots of reasons, whether you supported a losing candidate or the candidate that you supported who won then broke their promises. There are lots of reasons why people end up with voter apathy or believing that it doesn't matter what they say or what they think. Sometimes there are structural barriers to voting. So what does that mean? Well, so the first thing you need to know and that you need to realize is that states run elections. State legislatures are in charge of running elections, whether those are federal elections or state elections. Well, so why would the founders do that? Well, mostly because that's part of good democracy. People in charge shouldn't be able to make rules that keep themselves in power. So therefore, they make it so that there are different people who are running elections than the people who are actually running in the elections. But the federal government does have some power, and one way is through the Federal Elections Commission. The Federal Elections Commission is mostly focused on campaign finance, which we're going to talk about more later, but it is a part of the bureaucracy that is appointed by the president. Now, they are appointed every 2 years, and it's 6 people, and there can be no more than 3 from any political party. And so it actually takes 4 people on the commission to make any kind of changes towards federal elections. The other way that the federal government has some power over elections is through the Voting Rights Act of 1965. However, a lot of that power was stripped away after the court case of Shelby County versus Holder. Because states run elections, there are sometimes barriers that states put in place in order to prevent people from voting. Sometimes that comes through felony disenfranchisement. If you are convicted of a felony, in many states you are not allowed to vote while you are serving your sentence. Though in some states, if you are ever convicted of a felony, then you are never allowed to vote again. Just depends on the state where you live. Another way that states can try to prevent people from voting or to make it more challenging for people to vote is through photo ID laws. There are some good things about a photo ID law. It does, in some ways, help protect the validity of a vote. You have to present your photo ID in order to be able to vote. The problem comes when states make it challenging to actually get that photo ID. Some states, however, have been working on trying to make voting easier through things like same-day voter registration, early voting, and even motor voter laws. Some states have even gone to 100% mail-in voting, which means that every registered voter receives a ballot in the mail, which they then send back. They're able to vote on their own time, making it easier to vote, especially for people who have to work on a Tuesday. Another factor that can determine voter turnout is what type of election it actually is. There are presidential elections, which occur every 4 years, but in between presidential elections, there are what are called midterm elections for members of the United States House and Senate. And even more often than that, there are local elections. Many times, presidential elections actually have significantly higher voter turnout than midterm elections, even though the closer you get to your own locality, the more effect that official is going to actually have on you. Demographics can also determine voter turnout. Demographics have been studied by political scientists to help coordinate campaigns and predict elections for decades. Typically, this information is gathered from exit polls. And what political scientists have found is that older, better educated, wealthier, activists, church attendees, military veterans, these are all examples of voters who tend to show up in high numbers. There are also voting blocks, and these are demographic groups who tend to vote in noticeable patterns. So you will have the women's vote or the gender gap. There's a difference in the way that women vote versus the way that men vote. Or there are people who talk about the religious right or the tendency of Protestant Christians to vote for conservatives. We will actually be looking at how demographics affect voter turnout trends in class. But one thing you do need to remember is the gender gap, or the difference between how men and women tend to vote and think about politics. Typically, women tend to vote more liberally than men do, and they tend to actually vote more often. There are lots of factors that influence voter choice, from your party identification and your ideological orientation to a particular candidate and their characteristics, or what is actually going on in the political world at the time, even to the voters' demographics themselves. One last thing that can affect voter turnout would be compulsory voting, or the idea of having incentives or penalties for voting. The United States doesn't do either one of these, either incentives or penalties. However, there are some countries that do. Compulsory voting is where a country has laws that require their citizens to register and vote in all elections. And there are 10 countries currently that actually enforce those laws. Other countries provide incentives for their citizens to go vote, like they might actually pay them to go vote. However, the United States doesn't do either one of those, so it's not something that we're going to talk too much about. But if we did, it could affect voter turnout. In this lesson, you should have learned factors that impact voter turnout. If there's anything that you missed, please go back through now and re-watch that part of the video. Then, make sure you answer the summarizing question in your notes. That way you can get a stamp the next time we're in class. All right, we'll see you next time. Bye.